Jonathan?
Paul?
Are you there? As you know, this is the measure of an episode where where it is our mission to continue to explore what makes a Star Trek episode a genuine Star Trek episode and not just perhaps 80s movies.
Yeah.
A lot of 80s movies in this episode. My name is Paul.
And as we established at the beginning, I'm Jonathan. And we do this discerning with three criteria. One, is there a sci-fi element that is required within the plot? Two, is that sci-fi presented in a unique or novel way? And three, is there an ethical or moral dilemma? And along with this discerning, we have a tendency to offer up some suggested rewrites or some suggested rewrites.
You know, I gotta...
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Paul. Man, I have to say that was the most concise explanation of our criteria that I think we've ever had. So much so I might just copy and paste that in every episode so I don't have to do it anymore. Because it's getting longer somehow. The same amount of words, but it keeps getting longer.
Well, we should probably stop talking like this.
See, I want to speed that up and see what it sounds like. I might actually do that. So note to editing Paul. Speed that up.
Well, we should probably stop talking like this. I had a kid ask me a question in class, and I said, short answer, no. And my assistant goes, long answer, no.
Oh, wow. How old is he or she?
The assistant's like 20, 22.
Oh, I thought this was like a 10-year-old. I'm like, man, that kid is going to do great things.
I do not have a 10-year-old assistant in my classroom.
I thought you meant like go clap the erasers or something like that. That kind of thing. So you're telling me that the eraser clappers were not assistants? Because I was an assistant many times.
My life is shattered.
I know.
Right. Yeah, so the episode we watched.
The episode we watched was the original series. Season 1, episode 29, The City on the Edge of Zamunda. The blurb is, Bones travels back to 1930 Zamunda and inadvertently destroys the future. To reverse the damage, Kirk and Spock also go back to Zamunda and work at McDowell's.
And work at McDowell's? Is that what you said?
That's right. They work at McDowell's. And Kirk also falls in love with the manager of McDowell's.
This sounds a little like Sliders.
Well, have you heard of a little movie called Coming to America? Because this show,
okay.
This episode heavily reminded me of Time Zero, as you so astutely pointed out in our last episode. And it is kind of crazy that the old generator, random generator, kind of sandwiched these two, or not sandwiched, but placed them together, Time Zero and this one, because they are very similar, with a little dash of Coming to America. That's what it felt like. Because they go back, or they're not sowing their royal oats, or Kirk and Spock are not sowing their royal oats, but they take sort of a minimum wage paying job cleaning things, and Kirk falls in love with the person who runs the place that they work, and ultimately the person that Kirk loves dies.
Right.
Which does not happen in Coming to America. But we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
So far, the comparison is spot on. Well, actually, what I was going to say was Spock theorizing that they could time travel to McCoy's destination. Kirk and Spock step into the generator and vanished. They woke to find themselves trapped in the past, facing a history that is not their own and driven by a force to find and rescue McCoy. Their only guide on this journey is the device that Spock created, which appears in the form of vacuum tubes and radio waves. And so Kirk and Spock find themselves leaping from life to life, striving to right what once went wrong and hoping that each time the next leap will be the leap home.
Yeah, that works. And you also I thought you were going Sliders for a second. Because I think Sliders, Quantum Leap, Coming to America, they're all the same movie.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Good call on that.
So, I mean, obviously there's the huge ethical and moral dilemma. But based on previous conversations and things that you've mentioned here, specifically our first episode, I think that you argue that this is not a proper episode because the only sci-fi is the time travel.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know. This is very fluid. I'm using that word a lot today. Fluid. Not a great. It's like that's like moist adjacent. It's like not a great. It's like almost bad.
So just start saying like combine the two. Just say Floyd.
Floyd be where I get my hair cut. Floydst. It sounds like a German swear word. Floydst.
Which, dealing with Nazis, seems appropriate.
Because all Germans are Nazis.
Well, I was talking about the episode, dude.
Were there any Nazis?
They talked about like the fact that the Nazis developed the A-bomb before us.
Oh, you're right. You're right. So we've had this discussion many times in this episode where I claim that Back to the Future 1 is not really science fiction in that they get Marty McFly forward to the past, and then the whole movie kind of takes place, and then he time travels back again. So it's sort of sandwiched with science fiction, but not really to be considered a science fiction movie.
Right.
Because there's not a lot of theme. Although maybe I should amend that, because I will say the most compelling science fiction of this episode is the butterfly effect. And the idea that Bones going back in time has irrevocably changed things to the point that there really is no future, that the Enterprise disappears from where it was, and they're just sort of these orphaned members of a time that never was because of the butterfly effect. And that is a very, I think, high concept science fiction concept. And so... concept.
It's a high
Fluid.
concept, sci-fi concept.
Sci-fi high concept. Sci-fi high. That sounds like a good animation, doesn't it?
Yeah, with like, what, Principal Picard? Headmaster Picard and Assistant Headmaster, what, Spock? Riker? Neelix?
Keep going. Yeah, all of them. They all work there.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, they're all the admin team. But also, you got the Cylon as the hall monitor.
Wow, deep pull. Cylon. We got to talk about Battlestar Galactica at some point. We haven't... Galactica. At some point.
We're getting some emails now.
That's a good problem to have. Anyway, that is a high concept science fiction concept. And so Marty McFly does deal with that out in the core of the movie. And so maybe I was wrong about that, because that is the one thing that I did latch on to is the expression of the butterfly effect, which for people who don't know, essentially one small event at one point in time can have a giant ripple effect across time, in that it can affect the outcome of the future exponentially so the farther away you get from that event. And so I think the expression is a butterfly flaps his wing in Central Park and there's an earthquake in Venezuela or something like that. Right. Something to the tune of that. So but that to me, like, this is a proper Star Trek episode in that, as you said, they deal with the morality of should Kirk save this person who should die in order to restore the future as it was, or does he save her to be with her, but in effect condemning the world or Earth to fascism, I guess, was the theme of the show.
Right. Just talking about like condemning, the world to fascism. I kind of liked what they said was, we're going to hop in, and if we're not back, then you guys need to hop in to try and save us too. But just like he was kind of saying, like, I think he even said this, you don't want to be stuck on this planet because you won't survive. At least this way you can live your life, even if it's not in our time.
Yeah, I like that. That was cool. I liked that they were saying, don't follow us right yet, but if we don't come back, you guys try, and if not, but the thing that sucks, though, about that is you have a choice to make, because that's just Earth. For some reason, what did he call himself? The Gurgin of Forever? I heard Gurgin. Gurgin.
No, it was Guardian.
Oh. Well, I've heard it both ways. Anyway, he says that, and he only shows Earth stock footage. Where's all the stock footage from
Vulcan?
Yeah. Or any other planet?
Right. And
I understand why, because that's not interesting to do it the other way. And they didn't have stock footage of Vulcan at that point in time. But
they were using stock footage from movies, and this being made whenever it was 60 something. There must have been sci-fi alien movies before that they could have put in just some random thing you know, and Spock could have been like, oh, curious. They're playing history of Vulcan as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they didn't. See, I am a little disappointed in that we didn't get to explore the Gurgan as much. I wanted to know why are you speaking English? Why are you the way that you are? Who are you? Why have you been? It says at a certain point they say to the Gurgan, "Can you slow down? This is too fast." And they said, "This is how I've been built. How
Right.
I've been meant to show.
This
time.
is what the plot tells me to do. Yeah.
Yeah, this is what the script says, so I'm doing it." Which implies a builder
Yes.
of some kind. It's not just some sort of natural intelligence. It implies that this is a device, a machine that they don't understand. So I would have liked there to be a little bit more of that and less, I guess, more B-plot with that. Maybe cut back and forth from the team on the planet and less of the romantic stuff. Didn't really care. I know why they needed the romantic stuff.
Right.
Because of how they structured it. But I cared the least about that.
Right. Well, yeah, and they probably could have had a B plot and still got the same message across about Kirk's feelings and the bond that and the dilemma that he was developing. Because they did answer all of those questions, but it was very in a hand wavy way. You know, are you man or a machine? I am both and neither. And he's like, do you have to keep answering riddles? And he's like, that's the way that your feeble mind can understand it.
Yeah, it's just lazy writing.
Right.
That's what that
Well,
means.
which I liked because I mean, I don't like lazy writing, but I liked that they played with it because, you know, Spock was like, really, and Kirk is, you know, do I sense a hint of jealousy there, Mr. Spock?
Yeah, I liked that they were kind of playing. There was a nice little banter between Kirk and Spock throughout the entire episode. You know, Kirk would rib Spock a little bit, and he would kind of give it back in his Vulcan way, and it was kind of I liked that part. I wish that I can see why they leaned on that in the latter movies,
Right?
Where it wasn't just a captain lieutenant kind of dynamic. It was, hey, we're kind of buddies, and I rib you for your weird stuff, and you'll rib me for my weird stuff. I liked that. I saw why that was so popular.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and just that little line like in the basement. Sometimes I think I ask too much of you or something.
Yeah.
And Spock's like, oh, it's like that, is it? Okay, fine.
Yeah. And there was a point where they're kind of getting ready, they're putting their regular clothes on, and Spock is like, don't insult me as your commanding officer. It's not nice.
Right,
It's
right.
just a banter,
Yeah.
you know?
So then, sorry, just to back it up then a little bit, are you changing your position on Back to the Future to kind of realize the butterfly effect is a sci-fi element and making this a proper Star Trek episode? Or do we need to talk about that more because your position is the sci-fi was the time travel at the beginning and therefore it's not a proper Star Trek episode?
I don't know.
Okay.
Part of me doesn't want to retroactively make myself wrong.
Sure.
And the other part of me really likes this concept of the butterfly effect. Now, I will say in Back to the Future, the butterfly effect is narrowed just to Marty's life.
Right.
So it's kind of implied that his life is the only thing hanging in the balance.
Yeah.
I guess. Whereas this, they indicate that it totally changes history.
Completely.
Just Bones
Right.
going back has some effect where that has a terrible consequence. So, or not terrible, I guess you could argue, just different. Catastrophic, I guess you could say.
Right.
So I guess there's that difference,
Yeah.
which they don't really go into. I mean, everybody loves how Doc Brown explains these things to us, and he does kind of have one of his monologues where he explains the butterfly effect without calling it that. He's like, erased from existence, you know, that kind of thing. And so that's fun, but still, that's not really what the movie is about. Really, it's about him kind of getting to know his parents when they were kids.
Right.
And sort of planning this science fiction, or rather planning so the time machine can line up with the lightning strike, which in and of itself isn't really science fiction. It's just an event. It's a ticking clock, as it were, and a literal ticking clock.
Okay.
So I don't know. I mean, where do you come down?
Well, I understand your point about Back to the Future, and I think, you know, making it smaller in the way that it's only impacting Marty McFly's life kind of minimalizes the sci-fi element of it. But at the same time, I do feel like this episode is essentially the same thing. You know, like you're saying it's more about him getting to know his dad, but we're just kind of seeing Kirk fall in love with Edith. You know, the episode doesn't really revolve around them trying to find McCoy or trying to get back. Like it really is them just kind of waiting around, and in the meantime, he's going to go on a couple dates with this Edith gal.
Kirk falls in love again,
right,
in this episode.
Yeah. How many's that for us so far? I mean, there was obviously the Paradise Syndrome.
And they always die. Like his girlfriends always die. For some reason.
You would think he'd stop falling in love.
Well, you could argue, okay, she has to die. She has to be taken from this world. So bring her back.
Right. Yeah, I thought of that too. Yep. Like there was other than the emotional weight of the last 5 minutes. Like this episode was all build, rising action. And the climax and the falling action, the conclusion, like we're all just within those last 4 minutes. And it was kind of intense, just not like letting the audience sit with it on their own rather than having us sit with it with the characters.
Well, that's kind of how these episodes end. We've commented on this before that they really they do not have a lot of denouement in these episodes. They kind of just end it, and then the credits come. You're always like, whoa. You're just smacked in the face with the produced by credit. Right. It's like, oh, I guess the show's over.
Yeah, this one was just a lot heavier.
Yeah, but okay, so this is my thing. So I guess we should say to the audience, if you haven't seen the episode already, Bones goes mad and accidentally time travels back to the 1930s. Kirk and Spock travel after him.
Just to let the audience know, going mad is not what causes him to go back in time.
It's an abridgment. You know, when you read the abridged version of Les Mis, you're not getting all of it. Right? There are little intricacies.
Oh, I know.
So he goes mad, which forces him to travel back in time. And so Kirk and Spock go after him. They have to get a job in order to pay for materials for Spock to use his tricorder to determine where Bones might be and why it was so catastrophic that he came back. Eventually they find Bones. They learn that Kirk's new girlfriend, endemic girlfriend to that time, has to die in order for it to reset time. And so there's this moment where Kirk has to stop Bones from saving Edith, Kirk's girlfriend. He stops her. It's a very emotional moment. It's kind of a nice moment, actually, I will say. And then somehow they know how to travel back to the thing. Very unclear how they get back to the future.
The Gherkin said that he would just pull them back, and it would be as if nothing ever happened.
But how do they know when to be? Why wouldn't they pull back immediately upon Edith's death?
I mean, they kind of were. Like there was that moment with him, saying he knows, Doctor, he knows, and then it went back to the Guardian, and they came through. So.
But they walking through though. Like it would have been cool if they just materialized on the planet of Kirk clutching Bones.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
That would have been interesting. Yeah. And it would have answered the question. That it was sort of like a quantum leap type of thing where once you've accomplished your mission, it's time to leap, as it were.
That actually, yeah, if the conversation took place on the planet, in front of the rest of the crew, with just Bones saying, "Do you realize what you've done?" and Spock says, "He knows, Doctor, he knows," and then just kind of Kirk looks around at his team and then just says, "Let's get the hell out of here." That would have been cool.
Right. Well, and the ending, it's funny because they say in the opener, their mission is to seek out new life. Seek out new stuff. Mm-hmm. We want to find new stuff. We're exploratory. We're not out to just have sex and blow stuff up. But every time they find something that's new and interesting and almost magical as to how advanced it was or is, they always leave if it's not pleasant. They just leave. Like they don't say we're going to have, I mean, sometimes they do, I guess, in Next Gen, but I don't feel like they find this new thing. And granted, it's not pleasant. Right. People are going to die, but it's still new. You should still look at it and study it. Maybe you could learn something about it. Why are you just leaving?
Because that's not what it says in the opening. It says to seek out. They sought it out. That was the end.
They saw it, and then they logged it away. I guess you're right. They were true to it.
Right. It's like an Easter egg hunt. Like once you find the egg, you're not going to open it up and investigate it until you're all done.
It just seems like a waste of gas.
But
that's really all you're going out to do.
Like, because then you bring the egg back with you. Like this is literally them going, "There's the egg. There's the egg. There's the egg." How many is that? 3? Cool.
Well, okay. To go back to the whole science fiction thing, though. So I do like, in the same way that I liked to watch Data build stuff, even though it was lesser so in this episode, the TOS episode. There was a lot of that in this episode where he's building these vacuum tubes and he's somehow recorded history through his tricorder. And I got the impression, they never really go into it because I think that they didn't want to get too deep into the weeds. But I got the impression that the device, the Gurgan, was showing us every single bit of history.
Yes.
That it wasn't just a clip show of history, that it was all of history. And that the tricorder was recording all of history.
Yes.
So that's amazing.
Yes.
And the idea that Spock was then walking around, that he had to look at in order to go through with the plot, he was walking around with a complete, comprehensive, cumulative record of history, visual record of history, from newspaper articles to videos. I'm assuming it's just everything. It's just sort of this omnipotent database of human history. And that's amazing. Like, they never really go into that and how amazing that is. But he's just basically got a microfilm of everything.
Well, right. I mean, within a certain time frame, but yes, of everything.
Right, because he starts recording at a certain time. And it's unclear if it was like looping.
Right, I know. Yeah,
or,
I was a little confused by that too.
Because it was obviously very fast. It was like 2,000 years go by in what the stock footage was telling us, because it looked like it was
Romans,
Romans, and then it kind of jumped ahead to the 1900s. But
true, I guess. That's funny.
But the idea is still sound. The idea that he now has a total record. I mean, how cool is that?
So
that would change life if we actually had
absolutely. But to speak to the difference between this episode and Back to the Future, which kind of may reconcile it for you to say this is proper sci-fi with proper Star Trek without calling Back to the Future Star Trek or sci-fi. Man, lots of hard terms there. They didn't know which future was the correct one for a while. You know, was she supposed to live or was she supposed to die?
Yeah, that was cool. That was cool. So there was a lot more detail in the science fiction in this episode than there was in Back to the Future. I mean, there's a lot of kind of technobabble in Back to the Future from Doc, but it's never a conversation or something to be explored. It's just Doc telling Marty what he's doing and then Marty not knowing what he's talking about.
Right.
And it's never sort of a conversation. So maybe that still makes me right in the path in my my whole
with your Back to the Future
thing on with my Back to the Future.
While still allowing this episode to be proper Star Trek. Yeah.
Right, because it has to be. Right.
Why does it have to be?
I don't think we could get away. We cannot get away with this not being. And it is. I think it is. It checks all the boxes.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
Especially considering when it was made.
Just because it was like the second season and what makes Star Trek hadn't fully been established yet?
Well, this is the first season. And it's also in the 60s where the whole idea of time displacements in television just seems like it would have been very rare.
Oh, for sure.
And,
right.
And Next Gen, they talk about it all the time. And, the movie or the show starts out with them hitting turbulence from these time displacements, from these ripples in time.
Right.
And, I love that. I love that we just get right into it.
Well, yeah, and just that there's no explanation. There's no I mean, they do go down to the planet to explore it, but just, the way they explain it is there's time displacements that are impacting the ship. Oh, okay.
Yeah, they never get into it, and they needed to get back in time immediely. I understood that. It's too bad it wasn't a two-parter. Are there any two-parters in TOS?
There is one, yeah, and it's the one where they include the first pilot by doing the flashback of Spock's trial. I think is what it was. He has to explain what happened to Captain Pike. It
would have been nice if it took them until the second episode of the two-parter to get back in time, kind of like Time Zero. It's almost like Time Zero was not a redo, but a expansion on the theme, I guess. Although I will say that Data's head having gone through 500 years of time or 700 years of time had no effect on the future.
Right.
Really? It was just happened because I guess it was in a cave. Maybe that's what it is.
It was just it was a closed time loop, and that's what was different. Everything that had happened was supposed to happen, and so there wasn't anything that they could do differently because everything balanced itself out in the end. And this one was a legitimate. They had to. This is more yesterday's Enterprise.
And I mean, they could have gone into more. I mean, you could argue that just stepping foot back in time, just being there. Even if you think you're being inert, right, you have already changed things.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Possibly for the worst, right? So they could have gone into that. Like Spock, I could envision Spock saying something like, every interaction we have, even with inanimate objects, is affecting the future, and that we should minimize everything.
Yes.
We should not do, but they didn't do that because that would maybe have taken away from it. But I would love that. That would have been so cool.
So one quick note: it's very unclear what happens with the guy who runs into Bones, and then Bones falls asleep, and he kind of ruffles through his pockets and steals his phaser.
Oh yeah, totally. What? First of all, that was a communicator, I thought.
Right, but no, it is a phaser. And that was the other thing too. Like, I didn't realize that they had those little mini handheld phasers the way they do on Next Generation.
And that they had a suicide button on them, apparently.
Right. So the notes for it was that he was actually pointing it towards himself, and he put it on, and it was set to kill, vaporize, obliterate, whatever.
Right. But does that I'm assuming would not vaporize the phaser itself, and so then you had this whatever it was 500-year-old thing from the future that somebody was bound to find. See, they could have done that too. That would have been more interesting.
Yeah, but that was a plot thread. So most of the reruns of this episode, they just took that scene out completely. Like after Bones falls asleep, they just cut to the next scene.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Well, and it's interesting too because to watch it now, I mean, he's completely isolated. He's not even in the alleyway anymore. Like, he's just in this black area. So it looks almost like it was added in, but it was one of the original scenes. So
I could have seen them doing more with that character, where he stole it, doesn't kill himself with it, but tries to figure out what it does, realizes it's a weapon, and then just takes over the planet because he would be unstoppable.
Right.
So,
I mean, until it runs out of battery, which I assume it has to.
Does it though? I mean,
I would guess that yes, it does. I mean, it probably has an incredibly long battery life, longer than most away missions would ever be.
And you wouldn't need to use it that often.
Right. But, if he's using it for world domination, then he would probably be using it way more than is intended, and it probably would eventually run out of battery in his lifetime.
I did like when Bones showed up in the past, and he's trying to make friends. And the way that he makes friends, the way he introduces himself is like, no, I'm not going to kill you, I promise.
Right.
Just come closer to me.
Yeah.
Who's more threatening, the person saying I'm going to kill you, or the person says, no, I promise I won't kill you, just come here? Is it equal, or is one more than the other?
I mean, one is marginally more than the other because you know that they're going to.
Yeah, but I feel like when you hear somebody, man, I'm going to kill you, like that could be taken as not literal, whereas I promise I'm not going to kill you can really only be taken one way, is that, well, you're obviously planning on killing me.
Well, that's a lie.
I'm sure I would run a little bit harder away from that person than the guy who just said, I'm going to kill you. I don't know. It just seems less threatening. But to go there, what if the episode started with it just fade up from black, Bones travels back in time. You see him, he's all disheveled. He's obviously sick. He's not in his right mind. He starts telling people he's not going to kill them. And he falls asleep. And that's the end of the cold open. That would have been, I guess it would be harder to do it that way. You'd have to you couldn't just cut everything out before that, obviously. But that's a more intriguing opener than I think what they had.
It is, but I feel like also then you kind of run the risk of making it a little bit more comedic than it should because they keep missing each other. Or you have to fill in more time with them being together.
Right. It would be an entirely different script. Yeah. There's no getting around that.
Yeah.
But I think I like those kinds of openings where you're totally disoriented in what they're showing you. But anyway.
Yeah.
That's just me. But it's funny. So the same thing happened in this episode. We were 3.5 minutes left in the episode, and there was no ending in sight. Like, it was just like they were just in the middle of the plot. I'm like, when is this show going to end? Like, what?
Right. Is this a two-parter?
I was like,
right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I should have known better because that's how these episodes end. They just immediately end, and then that's the end. There's no denouement.
Mm-hmm.
But again, very similar to Time Zero. I do wonder, I would love to know, was this episode a reference for Time Zero? Just not necessarily in content, but were they nodding toward it, I guess?
Right.
Who can we ask?
I mean, based on all the research I did
listeners?
For Time Zeros, yeah, we can ask the listeners. Listeners, who should we ask?
Sorry, what were you saying?
Just in all the research that I did, like I didn't see anything about it being City on the Edge of Forever being a jumping off point for Time's Arrow.
It probably wouldn't be unless they said, we liked kind of like the way the Tribbles episode is obviously about the Tribbles, and the Naked Now is obviously, I think there's a TOS episode that is, it's definitely a conscious nod to and a deliberate nod to, whereas this could just be, hey, I watched this episode the other day. It kind of inspired us to do this for Time's Arrow. That would require a conversation with one of the writers.
Right. I will say though, just speaking to the episode and the writing of it in general, the episode was written by Harlan Ellison, but almost only by name. He actually wanted to take his name off of it because the rewrites were so massive that he felt like it wasn't his anymore. But Roddenberry actually kind of blackmailed him into keeping his name on it because the pseudonym that he wanted to use was the one that he uses when he doesn't agree with the changes that were made. And this was at a time where Roddenberry was trying to get Star Trek to have the clout and prestige so people would submit their episodes and he could get more experienced sci-fi writers on the crew, or at least to submit their stories. And so he forced Harlan Ellison to keep his name on it, even though the only 2 lines that are his are one spoken by the Guardian, and the rest was completely rewritten by Gene Kuhn. I think that's the guy, the one who and the gal that I talked about before, DC Fontana. The 2 of them kind of rewrote it to make it what it was. But what's interesting is what was going to happen was after the crewman, not even McCoy, jumped into the Guardian, there would actually be a different ship in space. It was going to be what they called a Condor. And so they wouldn't be completely stranded. There would actually be another ship out there, but it wasn't their ship, and they had no idea who the crew was that was down there.
Now that would be very interesting. That is licensed for a B plot where they speak an entirely different language.
Oh, nice, right? Yeah,
it's not. They don't look exactly. Although we're not talking about history, like they would be. Maybe they weren't. I mean, they would still be humans, but it would just be different. Maybe they spoke German or Chinese.
That would have been cool though, like to speak German and then to go back and realize that it's because Germany won the World War.
Right, or do a shootout that they leave in the middle of, that they know they can go back and they have all the time in the world to fix during this shootout with this hostile human ship. And maybe they have just 5 seconds, but in the course of 5 seconds, they can go back and forth in between time and fix everything before people die.
Right.
That would have been more interesting in terms of illustrating how things can be totally different and yet the same. Like you could have this ship in the same place, this random planet, but it be totally different.
Right. Yeah, they had to make the changes for budgetary reasons. Like the episode already had gone over budget and had gone over time, so they couldn't do it just for budgetary reasons. But it was also not McCoy. It was just some random crewman who was actually dealing drugs on the Enterprise, and he was trying to get away. And when they caught him, so aside from that, like the plot was basically the same. But at the very end, Kirk actually freezes and doesn't stop Beckwith stop the crewman from saving Edith, and Spock had to instead. But as a punishment for causing all of this to happen, they send the crewman to a supernova, and he is on a time loop, and he just dies over and over again by being exposed to the supernova.
That's mean, just for selling some marijuana.
Well, I mean, and for completely altering the timeline, but yeah, just for selling marijuana.
I mean, that's a lot of calories to burn for punishment.
Right.
That would be interesting, though, just to what a crazy prison that would be.
Yeah. They did the rewrites obviously because one of the things that Roddenberry was saying was that we've moved past drug use, but so that part didn't work at all.
Which later gets amended because there is addiction in Star Trek.
Oh yeah,
there is
Yeah, after Roddenberry passed away, there's people get addicted to video games, and there's somebody who's recovering from addiction in Picard.
Well, and that whole episode, The Game in Next Gen.
Right.
Yeah, but still a good episode. I could have done with less of the Kirk falls in love thread. I felt like they could have done that differently without having to set up this whole romantic thing.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that was something that was required by audiences to have it be a Star Trek or to have it be a real show. But I could have done less with it. I didn't think you needed it. I would have liked more exploration of what Spock was doing.
Sure. Well, okay. So how then would you have caused the dilemma and the tension, that the sacrifice that Kirk had to make if there wasn't the love plot?
Well, killing somebody, I think is, granted, it's maybe more difficult if you're in love with them, but a difficult thing to do nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
And so just the idea that you have to kill a random person, I think you could set it up in such a way where you just didn't want to do that. And they're saying, look, whatever happened, he's not dead. He needs to be dead. I don't know, but you could do it. You could set it up so the emotional stakes were there without having to go through so much of the romantic stuff, which just feels like even overdone at this point, even though we've only seen 10 episodes of this.
But still, going off of your point, like I feel like that would have just been a step too far if Kirk had to decide of putting his family, like let's say, he just befriends this guy who is working hard and he's got 5 kids, and he's got like 2 jobs to try to take care of his family. Like it's during the Great Depression. Like that's when this happens. And he has to decide of putting that family in ruin to save the timeline and mankind, or letting him live and consequently ruining the timeline. And just like knowing his family and knowing the destitution that would put them in, and knowing that he still has to go through with it. Like I feel like that would have been just as emotional, but I feel like almost too dark for the 60s and for the audience.
Well, what if we took it even darker and that he wasn't this great guy, but a terrible guy who beat people up and beat his family up, but he has to stay alive. He has to continue doing that because one of his children is the general who fixes everything later in the war or whatever. There's some sort of butterfly effect that happens, but he's still a terrible person.
Yeah.
And that could be even more interesting to say, oh, we have to let this monster live so that another monster can die.
Right.
Ultimately.
Yeah, the lesser of two evils.
Which I think is also an episode.
Is it?
Title. It sounds like it, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
But a great episode. I really did like the episode. It wasn't as, I don't want to say tongue-in-cheek, but I guess corny.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these TOS episodes just read as corny to me.
Right.
And that's just a time and place kind of thing for me, I think. But this one did not read that very often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, I mean, but I don't even think we're saying it could have been better. I think that we're just saying, here's some things that they could have done differently for like either a modern audience or for them to have considered. But I don't think that we're trying to say those parts in it were not good. No,
I think for me, I would have liked to have seen those things more than I liked watching the romantic stuff, or that.
Yeah, and I
it just seemed unnecessary.
Right. And I think at this point we're just kind of splitting hairs, but I think that having those character moments and the slow build, we wouldn't have gotten that as much if we had pulled away to a B plot either on the planet or with Spock. And I think you're right. I think that this could have been a great 2-parter if we had included those 2 other plots. Had a B plot and a C plot of dealing with what was happening on the planet and what Spock was doing, and just expanded out into a full 2-part series, or a 2-part episode. That would have been fantastic.
Yeah, it would have been nice. It would have been nice to watch Spock do his thing.
Yeah.
Which is always minimal, or I should say minimized, in Star Trek. We never really get to see him. Maybe in the movies we do, or maybe in latter episodes we do. But I want to see him just doing stuff, like kind of the same way I want to see Data doing stuff.
But I love when they acknowledge that kind of thing. When Spock was talking about fixing the pyres on in the Paradise Syndrome, he's like, if I reverse the pull, and Kirk is like, I don't care how you do it, just do it. Like, just cuts him off.
Yeah. It would have been neat to see him walking around and doing research and befriending certain people.
Oh, that would have been neat. And just a little bit more fish out of water stuff with him. It doesn't have to be played tongue in cheek or corny, but just to see him trying to, kind of like what Data said, I am from China or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Vulcans are so strong, so it would have been fun to see that as well. Have him do some kind of manual labor thing where he's doing it with ease.
That would have been cool. That would have been a great way for them to make money, as opposed to working at McDowell's.
Right.
Mopping.
Yeah.
And serving coffee.
But I don't know if Vulcan strength was established at this point, so maybe it wasn't even an option yet.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would love to know. Can we find out? Should we go watch every episode? Episodes 1 through 28? See if that's true.
Yeah. All right. So what are we watching next? Episode 1?
Haven't we seen it? We may have seen that already.
I don't think so.
No, we haven't seen it. No, we haven't. No, you're right.
But yeah, let's see what we're watching next. Back to Voyager, we have Alice, episode 5, season 6. Super excited for this one. I feel like anytime there's a person's name in the title that isn't somebody that we know, which how many episodes have that? I think Data's Day. Is that it?
It's always going to be a tragic end of some kind.
Right. Or just
no matter what.
Or we're focused on a character, that I feel Voyager in particular really struggles with this. They'll introduce a character that Voyager follows, and I already have a hard time with the characters on Voyager, so to have somebody else I'm not invested in be followed around, I have a really hard time with it. So let's find out. But the crew discovers a space-age junkyard near their course. Desperate for supplies, Voyager later finds an eager trader. Trader, not Traitor.
An eager trader? The worst kind, by the way. But the easiest to spot.
Yeah, they show their cards real fast.
Well, I mean, it doesn't sound bad.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of nice to desperate for supplies. Like, that sounds cool. But I would imagine it's just going to start with, Captain's log. We've been traveling for weeks and have not found any planets or places to stop for supplies, so we desperately need some. We've just come across a space junkyard, that's not too far off course. So we're going to go there and explore.
See, that's intriguing. I feel like Voyager, that's one thing that Voyager gets right, which is the idea of a scarcity of resources. Mm-hmm. That it can be very fun when you're trying to scavenge.
Yes.
And the things that you run into when you have to scavenge and the choices you have to make. Basically, it's kind of like misery porn in a way. Mm-hmm. Where you get to see people suffer,
right?
And they have to push themselves to the limit in order to accomplish what they need to survive. That's fun to watch for me. Revenant was a fun movie.
No, and I completely agree, but I feel like what Voyager gets wrong, and I know that this is what Brian Fuller wanted and the original idea of the series wanted, and they didn't do it because they wanted to make it more episodic, but is to watch episodes where they are struggling, where they do run out of photon torpedoes, where the nacelles, like one of them is broken, and so they have to travel at impulse speed for the entire episode. And not show, like it all happens in between episodes, and we come in on them securing the deal, and then the conflict starts. Or, like this episode as it sounds, I mean, we'll find out, but they're stumbling along for however long between episodes, and now we're coming in just as they find the junkyard.
Yeah.
And I'd rather see that.
I would love that.
I'd rather see that transition between, like, what are they doing to make it that far?
Could be awesome. Like, we're not going to get that. Sorry to tell you.
I know we're not going to, but this episode could be great.
They're going to have a full complement of food, water, and munitions, and their ship will be immaculate.
Okay.
When they arrive.
So here's a question for you before we watch. Do you think Alice is a character, or do you think they're referencing Alice in Wonderland?
I remember what this is.
Okay, then never mind.
So I know what this is.
Okay.
That's a bad question.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think it is?
I would love for it to be that they are referencing Alice in Wonderland, and Voyager, if not a specific character, is going to be Alice in this as they kind of travel through the Wonderland that is the junkyard. But I'm pretty sure that it's going to be the character, and more than likely, it's the eager trader.
Right. Well, we will find out.
Only one way. Yep.
There's only one way.
Let's go watch it.
Well, no,
there's so many ways. Right? I could just
there's so many ways.
Yep. Google Voyager Alice. Go on to Facebook and say, "Hey guys, have you seen Alice? What's it about?"
Yeah. I could probably ask Siri, and she would read me an adequate synopsis where I wouldn't have to watch the episode.
Right.
But I'm not going to do that because that's not the point of the podcast.
Exactly. The point of the podcast is to explore what makes a Star Trek. Anyway, we're going to hear that next week. You already heard it at the beginning. Let's go watch it.
All right.